My kids empowered me to get out.
Working with different elected officials, learning and understanding how to put the community first.
Hello and welcome to Keeping It Real with Shannon. As you know, we continue to talk about mental health because it's really becoming a real crisis. Mostly when we talk about mental health, we talk about it in the way of getting medication to treat the illness. But today, we want to talk about a new approach of dealing with mental health. And our special guest today is going to talk to us about those new approaches.
Yes, our special guest today is Dr. Jessie Fields. Having grown up in a poor Black community in Philadelphia, she set out on a career to bring better health conditions to poor urban communities. During medical school, she initiated a hypertension screening program on the west side of Chicago in a neighborhood health clinic. After moving to New York in 1991, she started primary care she practiced as a primary care physician in Brooklyn, and now she's currently practices at Mount Sinai Faculty Practice in Central Harlem. Our next guest is Dr. HUGH POLK. He's a psychiatrist and social therapist practicing in New York City. He has over 40 years of practicing, presenting, and leading workshops in the U.S. and around the world on social therapy, the non-diagnostic developmental therapeutic approach developed by Fred Newman in the late 1960s. He is a longtime activist for new approaches in mental health, which include clients in the creation of their mental health and wellness development. We'd like to welcome my guest to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Hello, how are you?
Thank you so much for having us. We're thrilled to be with you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. As you know, we always talking about mental health, but I tell you, everything ties into each other. So we are all elated today to get the news and results of the George Floyd trial. And, you know, I was even thinking, like I say, everything ties into each other.
Yeah.
Because when you even think about the officer that was being charged, like, what kind of mental state could you possibly have been in to do what you did, and then to think that you had no value for life? But people, you know, they think when people do things like that, that maybe they don't have a problem. But I see it was a problem. I think this person had a problem. That's what I think.
Yes, I agree. Shannon, I agree very much. And I see every day the impacts of racism and inequality and injustice on all people. And you were referring to the police officer who killed George Floyd. And it clearly, racism was operative. Violence and racism, which are, you know, things, this kind of thing has been happening for a very long time.
Yes.
We now have cell phone video, and it's more exposed. But the racism that's structural in our society, in our country, unfortunately, for years and years, centuries, has not been overcome. We haven't figured out how to overcome it. And I think what we're talking about today, that is social therapeutics, people as activists in their care, creating our mental health, it means really creating a new way and changing the world in certain ways. And dealing with things like oppression, racism, inequality, because it has an emotional impact on people. I see that every day. I know, you know, people walking around in our communities, this kind of thing, it was very hurtful. People were felt that. The killing of the 13-year-old in Chicago, you know, Tamir Rice, and on and on and on, Breonna Taylor, these things are impact on all of us. And the families go through a great deal of suffering. So we want to talk about what to do in our daily lives, how we can grow and develop and really change things, change the conditions in which we live.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I was watching on TV before coming on your show and watching the verdict and the family speak, and this is so unbelievably emotional. I was crying watching this, and it's a joyful moment. At the same time, these killings go on, and we know we have an incredibly long way to go. But I'm so glad to be sharing this this day with you all today. So
thank you.
That's good. That's good. I wanted to agree. I just want to add on to something what Jessie was mentioning about the racism. And as you know, in the climate of today in our society, the structural systemic racism is working how it's been designed to work. You know, and now is the time when you have the verdict in the George Floyd case, when we need change. Change is like imminent.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's imminent, and it's a historic opportunity, and I join with all of you and people around the world who want to use this opportunity to further this.
Absolutely. You know, there has been now, since with the murder of George Floyd and many others, Breonna Taylor, many others, there has now been a call, which everyone is aware of, to change the investment simply in policing and punishment, to deal with to reinvest in our communities. And so Dr. Hugh POLK and myself have been raising the question of what kind of mental health care, what kind of emotional support, how do we in fact support the community? We can't just keep doing the same kinds of traditional methodologies that in many ways have not worked for a majority of people. So the social therapeutics movement is very much related to what we're talking about, because we've been meeting with people in St. Louis, in Philadelphia, in New York, about the kind of therapies that we can build in the community. And, you know, I have some examples of things I do in my practice as a physician, and Dr. POLK is a psychiatrist who is a social therapist, which is very unique.
So tell us this new approach that you've been working on, because it's totally different from laying on the couch talking to the psychiatrist and stuff. So you have new ways, new approaches. So tell us about those new approaches now that we all should be involved in using, you know, to help our loved ones or to help our friends that we need to help.
Yes. Well, let me, I can start, and Jessie will join me. And, you know, as a psychiatrist, I was trained, as all psychiatrists are, in diagnosing people and labeling them and relating to their so-called mental illness. And, but you know, that has a bad track record for many, many, many years, 100 years. Psychiatry has been treating people in the community, and breakthroughs have been made in psychiatric medications. But if you look around our communities and the world, the mental health of people is actually getting worse, I would argue. And so what we need to do, and what Jessie and I have been working on for the last 45 years together, is an approach where we relate to our clients as partners in creating the therapy work. We look to them to provide leadership for what they need for their mental health. And our whole approach has been not to label or diagnose people, but to enlist them as leaders in creating our mental health, and that's what we're doing. And I can say more about concretely what that looks like, but in a nutshell, that's very radically different than psychiatry and social work and psychology, which relates to people as the passive recipients of medications or what the doctor as expert says to them. And we're doing something very different.
Right. Maybe I could give an example, because I'm a physician. I'm not a psychiatrist, but this is an example of how I think how physical health and mental health and emotional health are really inseparable. So I see patients every day. I see many patients with chronic illnesses, including diabetes, high blood pressure, and I've been actually very recently, I saw a patient, and she has diabetes. We were talking about what she's eating, and she was telling me in her family, which she lives with her husband and their young son, and she is eating more of the vegetables and healthier food, and they're eating healthy food too, but not starches, no sugars, no starch. So she's sort of eating separate from them. And I picked this up when I was talking to her, that it seemed like there wasn't a togetherness at meal times. And she had been telling me how she'd been going through depression and loneliness, and her blood sugars are going up and down, even though she has an insulin pump. So she has the latest technology. But we talked, and it was really a sort of a social therapeutics that I was doing with her. I said to her, it sounds like you're separate from your husband and your son at the dinner table. And maybe you could speak to them and ask and tell them that you'd like to have their support. You'd like them to eat what you're eating. And I told her she could speak to them individually or together, however she wanted to do that. And she really liked that idea. And she said, yes, I have been feeling lonely and depressed, and this is something I could do. So we talked about how she might do that. So it really wasn't so much about the diet and the food, but about the emotional relationship and how she, as an activist, as someone who can create an environment where she can help to grow and develop and have this new experience and really come together in her home with her family. That's one example of social therapeutics.
So, Jessie, are you saying that people that kind of distance themselves, or just like you was using the example of the lady eating with her family, that if you stay by yourself a lot and you are not interacting either with the family or your friends or whatever, that can also lead to some sign of mental depression?
Yes, it can lead to depression, sadness, loneliness, social isolation, which many people are experiencing even more. That social isolation, being alone and not being connected to people, has an impact on a person's physical health. It's been shown scientifically to have an impact. So what we're trying to do is to support and encourage people to do a new performance, to say to your family, your husband and son, I really want us to do this together. And I'd like you to support me to be able to eat healthy. It actually turns out to be better for them also, but I'd like us to do this together. So I was supporting her to do something new, to try to create an environment in her home that's healthier for her.
So you're saying, so when people start having mental issues, it can easily start on just something minor, what you were saying. It can just start minor and then, eventually reach into something more serious.
Yeah, they don't know what to do. You might see a psychiatrist or someone not like Dr. POLK, but a different kind of, someone who gives prescriptions, and they might get a prescription. But what we're about is really helping people do something much more creative, much more powerful that can really help them to grow. I think that's one of the sadnesses about how mental health is dealt with in this country. I see patients all the time. They have a diagnosis, schizophrenia, bipolar. They're just given medications, and they're just sort of like pacified or controlled, but they're not able to grow.
See, I think what Jessie is saying.
Hold that thought, Hugh. Hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break and come back. And when we come back, I want to get into when you do the workshops on the mental health with the people, what happens at those workshops that would help people with mental health. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Great.
It's Shannon.
When I was growing up, my mom was extremely tidy. We were trained to put things back where we got them from. One day, when I walked into my mom's house, I felt like I walked to someone else's house. There was stuff everywhere. And just growing up the way I grew up, and to see this transition was very alarming.
When Sean talked to me, it was a wake-up call, and that's when I went to the doctor.
Hi, we are back, and thanks for joining us today. Our special guest is Dr. Hugh POLK and Dr. Jessie Fields. Now, before we went to break, we was talking about the old way of treating mental health, but now we have new ways and new approaches of dealing with mental health. So rather than me coming to Dr. POLK's office and lying on the couch and tell all my little issues and stuff. This new approach where we come together in a group workshop setting, what happens at those workshops that we deal and how we deal with mental health?
Yeah. Well, a colleague of mine, Rachel Mickenberg, and I have been for the last couple of years leading workshops that are open to the public, and anyone can come. And the workshops are entitled Creating Our Mental Health. And what we do in those workshops is we usually start off each month. We do them monthly. And we start off with an improv exercise to bring people together. It's a lot of fun, and people, get kind of on the same wavelength and so on. We're doing these things on Zoom now, by the way. And so then after that, we open up the floor and say, listen, tell us what's on your mind. And what we want to do at these workshops is help people to really listen in some new ways to what other people are saying. Let them give it a moment to wash over when somebody talks. Take seriously what they're saying. And when you respond to what listen, not just to wait till you have your turn to talk up and say your position on what they've said, but rather ask a question of them, build the conversation, take the conversation somewhere new. This is an improv activity to create conversations. And so we tell them that, and then we say, the floor is open. What shall we do today? What do you want to talk about? What's on your minds? And here's an example, just a little example of the kinds of conversations that go on. So a woman said, I've been really so depressed. By the way, these groups are very mixed, all different races and different social class backgrounds, and gay and straight people, and just a wildly diverse grouping of people, often people who would never be in the same room together, but here they are because they want to talk to each other and get some help with what's ever bothering them. So this woman said, I've been really depressed since the pandemic. I'm isolated and I'm alone. And then she started crying, and she said, I so much miss touching people and hugging them, and I'm a hugger, and I can't do that. And so she said, I went to the dentist. I had to have some dental work, and I so much wanted to say to the dentist, could you hold my hand? And she said, I felt embarrassed to feel that way, and I didn't have the guts to actually say that to him, but I wanted to. And as she told us this, the group was listening intently, and she was crying, and somebody said to her, well, how does it feel to be telling us this? And she said, well, I feel really embarrassed to be telling you. And then somebody else said, boy, don't be embarrassed. That's what we're here for, is to talk to each other. And it's great that you're telling us this. And
so the people at the work, and I'll cut you off, but the people at the workshop, are these people that's already going through a little depression, or these are just regular people where we are trying to prevent them from going into depression? Who's at the workshop? Are they already experiencing mental health issues?
This is open to anybody who wants to come. Some people, we've had people with serious diagnoses, schizophrenia. We've had other people who have garden variety depression, anxiety. We all have those kinds of things, but it's a whole mixture of people. It's not just it's for people.
Right. I think that's one of the things, if I could jump in a little bit, I think that's one of the things that's helpful about it, is that it's diverse. It's different kinds of people, some with mental health diagnoses, depressions, personality, whatever diagnoses, disorders, and schizophrenia, bipolar. I've also witnessed some of those workshops at the All Stars Project, which is a youth development program that works with inner city youth, before the pandemic, and it's very helpful to have different people experiencing emotionality, because emotionality really is social. It's something that we all feel and we can share, and people get so much support from having that kind of an environment.
I guess I wanted to add, it seemed like also a place where people can just come to vent, right? To vent freely, right? And being that they may exhibit some type of emotional discomfort, it allows them to be in a space where they can come back home and change the narrative of how they're being perceived, maybe by the family and the friends and other loved ones who's not able to really identify what they're going through.
Yes, exactly. It gives people, and in Jessie's example, you know, she was relating to that person as somebody who could ask her family for things rather than just do whatever anybody else wanted. That's so empowering and growthful for that person, and that's what we do. And in this workshop, what happened is this woman was speaking, and people said, it's really great that you're talking here. And then somebody else did this amazing thing. She said, let's all reach out. She wanted to touch us. Let's all reach out with our hands. And you see what I'm doing with my hand? And she reached out toward Barbara, her name was, and then other people followed suit. And we were all together kind of holding Barbara's hand, which is what she said she missed so much. And it was so emotional and creative. And this grouping of people just created this beautiful response to her. And that's how I treat depression.
By talking in group settings.
By sharing and building creative responses that the group and me and we together come up with.
So are you also saying too that, okay, I know you have these workshops at the Institute where you can have people to come, you know, like Vanessa said, and they can express their feelings and how they're feeling and everything. So are you suggesting that even just with family members, if they have a member in the family that they know have some kind of, you know, mental issues and stuff like that, that the family should also come together at certain times as a group, as a family, to talk to that individual, or even just for everybody to talk? Because even if the family member has issues, that means the whole family has issues, because even though you are not considered having a mental problem, but you will feel like you are having a mental problem because you have to deal with that person.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely,
so we should come
Lottie.
together in groups, or the community could start setting up centers, you know, where people can come to the event, and that way you feel that it would be less people having mental issues.
Yes, absolutely, because we're social, you know, we're a social species, but one of the failings of psychiatry and psychology is to relate to people as individuals. Like, you have to treat them in individuals, you give them an individual diagnosis. But our whole point in doing these workshops is not just to do the workshops, it's to help people develop skills for doing exactly what you're saying, Lottie, for the family or friends or who, to talk to each other. And that we, you know, so often people won't talk to each other about these matters because they feel ashamed or embarrassed. And what we do is help to normalize these things. These emotions that we have are ordinary in a certain sense, and we all have them, and we can talk to each other if we listen to each other and develop new skills to do that. So what you're saying is so important.
I agree.
Yeah, because see, mental health has always been like a stigma. People think that if you talk about it, people think you're crazy. You know, it's just like when parents have a child and something ain't right with them, and you might say, well, you need to get them evaluated. Well, like, there's nothing wrong with my child, I ain't getting them. That's not what it's about.
I think we have to really change that, Lottie. That stigma, it's a very deep, heavy stigma that keeps people from saying what's going on. I mean, I just had a patient today, unfortunately, her grandson took his own life, and nobody knew. They didn't even know he was feeling unhappy. Nobody knew, and the whole family is suffering and very, very hurt, you know, to lose him. So it's so important that we connect. And what we're doing, we're helping people to be able to say, I'm having difficulty, and to pay attention to who they're talking to, and to try to create an environment, a setting, a situation, to think about who they're going to go to for help, but to get help. And that's very, very important, to not just be victims, but to be, even if a person is suffering and in a lot of pain, they can create an environment with others. They can learn how to ask for help and how to do that in a way that really touches other people.
Yeah. But Dr. Fields, I hear when people, and I don't know, because I'm not judging or anything, like that, but when people, like your family member that you around all the time, or one of your friends that you around all the time, and then like when something happened and it boils down to it was something mental, they would be like, oh, I didn't know they had a problem. I didn't know they had an issue. But if you're around someone all the time and they act a certain way, and then after a while they're not acting that way, you wouldn't suspect there's something going on there. I mean, it may not be totally mental, but my thing, I would be saying like, now Vanessa ain't acting right, because that's not the way she used to act and everything. So you don't notice that something is not right about that person?
Well, you might notice, but the issue is, can you get help for them? Can you speak to them? A lot of times, we've been seeing all these gun violence, episodes of gun violence, and many people, as you were pointing out earlier, have sought help, or some have been in therapy, or they have been seeing a psychiatrist, but it's not working. It's not really helping people. And I think that's one of the things we need new approaches. We need really effective approaches that go beyond just giving someone a prescription.
Yeah.
Well, first we need to, I just want to add, yes. Well, first we need to identify that mental health is a public health issue. So it goes back to the suicide, is that people underestimate one's ability to take their lives. So there's really signs out there, but people are not really trained to identify them. They're not prominent. You cannot identify them. So it's very hard for them to really tailor what type of support they can lead them to.
Yeah. See, I think this whole discussion comes back in a way to the stigma and the shame of so-called mental illness. And it prevents people from just talking to each other. I mean, in the example you gave, Lottie, about somebody, a family member, not acting right or acting different. What if we were to just say to that family member, hey, how are you? What's going on? You seem different, or are you things happening? Let's talk. That's revolutionary. That could change everyone's life if we learn to destigmatize talking about our emotions, because we all have them, and we all have troubled thoughts and feelings, and everyone. Let's talk to each other.
Well, you know what? Our time is up, but we're gonna have to bring you back so we can talk more about this mental health, because it's really a problem. It really is. It doesn't look like it's coming to an end. So it's really an ongoing conversation. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us about a new approach, rather than always going to the doctor's office. So we, as people and family members, community people, if we see something going on, then we need to bring people together as a group so we can talk, vent, whatever you want to call it. That's what we need to do. So thank you again for coming today, and hopefully you'll come back in the future and talk with us
we would love to.
We would love to. Thank you for having us on and for talking about this important issue.
Yes, we're going to bring you back another time to finish this conversation. So everybody that was watching tonight, you got a new approach to use. So if some family member this is not acting right, or some friend or whatever, just don't stand around talking about them. Approach some family member and get people together and do an intervention to help that person out. Let's get rid of this stigma, because that's what we really need to do. So thank you again for watching. And as always, we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Lottie. Take care.
Today's show is sponsored by Abu's Bakery. If you have a sweet tooth, stop by Abu's Bakery for some delicious cakes and pies.
It's Shannon. It's Shannon. It's Shannon. It's Shannon. It's Shannon. It's Shannon. Keeping it real. It's Shannon. It's Shannon. It's Shannon.
Yes. Talked about. Oh, Carol, is no after show. Lottie is out. Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.